Welcome to another edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, the series that takes a critical look at Scripture, pointing out its numerous errors, contradictions, and fallacies. This program teaches a kind of Sunday school in reverse by giving you the biblical information that you should have heard but didn't. With millions of Americans hearing a totally one-sided presentation of the Bible, balance is greatly needed. Only when people are given both sides of an issue can a truly objective analysis be possible. And here to provide the alternative perspective is the editor of Biblical Errancy newsletter, Mr. Dennis McKenzie.
Welcome to the 72nd edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary. We're pleased you've joined us. This is the fourth program in our series of 8 on biblical history. In the last 3 programs, we discussed historical problems within both the Old and New Testaments. We can now focus on another interesting historical consideration. It concerns the degree to which several numbers and population statistics are either incredible, impractical, or inaccurate. Prime examples are the following. First, Genesis 46:27 states, quote, "The members of Jacob's family which went down into Egypt were 70 in all." And that conflicts with Exodus 38:26, which says, quote, "From everyone who had crossed over, across the Red Sea, to those counted 22 years old or more, a total of 603,550 men." Unquote. In other words, over 600,000 men over the age of 22 crossed the Red Sea with Moses. For each man in the 600,000 figure, one can safely assume that there was at least one woman and 3 children, which would have totaled more than 3 million people. In other words, approximately 3 million people crossed the Red Sea with Moses. One of Jacob's sons, who went down into Egypt with him, was named Levi. Levi was the father of Kohath, who was the father of Amram, who was the father of Moses, who led the Exodus. This would mean 70 people went down into Egypt in Genesis 46, and approximately 3 million people emerged only 4 generations later. The sons of Jacob had approximately 5 sons each. If all of Jacob's grandsons also had sons, 5 sons each, and so on throughout the following generations, and nobody had died, which is all but impossible, there would have been nowhere near 600,000 males by the time of the Exodus. Any rational increase in these numbers would not change the totals very much, even if all of the 70 who went down into Egypt were Jacob's grandsons, and each had 5 sons. The biblical scholar Joseph Wheelis says that for 3 million people to have left Egypt 4 generations later, each of the 55 males of the first generation would have had to have had 40 children, 40 boys and 40 girls, and so on with each generation. In addition, it's especially difficult to see how the Israelites increased to 3 million people in light of Deuteronomy 7:7, which says, quote, "The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you are more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people," referring to the Jews, unquote. In simple terms, how could 70 people have gone down into Egypt and emerged as 3 million people just 4 generations later? That would have been human reproduction on a scale that would have made rabbits envious. Second, Exodus 12:51 adds to this problem by saying, quote, "It came to pass the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies," unquote. If in fact 3 million Israelites did leave in one day, the selfsame day, we are faced with the following problems. A, it would have taken several days, if not weeks, for the message to have reached the people in the outlying districts, and even more time for the people to have assembled and left. Imagine communicating with and assembling 3 million people in that day and age. B, before they left Egypt, Exodus 12:35 to 36 says the Israelites did according to the word of Moses. Quote, they borrowed from the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent to them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians, unquote. Assuming it took 1 hour to mobilize and 8 hours to collect all of the items just mentioned in Exodus 12:35 to 36, they would have 15 hours left to leave Egypt. That would have required them to move at more than 60 miles an hour, according to one source. And C, if they marched in close rank, in close order, with 50 abreast, and only a yard interval between the ranks, there would have been 48,284 ranks forming a column 28 miles long. Third, when we compare Leviticus 8:3 to 4, in which God says to Moses, quote, gather thou all the congregation together in front of the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and Moses did as the Lord commanded, and the assembly was gathered together at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. When we combine that with Exodus 27:18, which states, quote, the length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 cubits, that is about 150 by 75 feet, a major problem immediately surfaces. Gathering over 600,000 men in front of a tent with only 150 by a 75-foot court is all but impossible, in light of the fact that a crowd that size would comprise a mass 1/4 mile square in density. And when we note that Leviticus says all the congregation was gathered, not just 600,000 men, the problem grows to astronomical proportions, since that would involve around 3 million people and extended over several miles. Fourth, Deuteronomy 1:1 states, quote, these be the words which Moses spake to all of Israel, unquote. How could one man have spoken to and been heard by more than 600,000 men, let alone 3 million people? Moses didn't even have a bullhorn, much less a PA system. Fifth, Numbers 11:31 to 32 says, quote, a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It brought them down all around the camp to about 3 feet above the ground, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night, and all the next day, the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 omers. Then they spread them all around the camp, unquote. This rain of quail food presents some major difficulties besides the fact that quail don't live out at sea. An omer is about 10 bushels. So at the least quail gathered by anyone was 100 bushels, or about 800 gallons. Estimating 15 quails to the gallon gives about 12,000 quail to each person, a rather large accumulation indeed. B, a biblical day's journey, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, is about 44,000 meters, or about 49,000 yards, or approximately 27.8 miles. The area covered would be about 4,400 square miles and be composed of solid quail 2 cubits, or about 30